Today, we're going to look at one of history's most famous generals, but probably not in the way you're used to. We're not here to talk about glorious battles and heroic charges. Instead, we're going to reverse engineer a system for victory. We're deconstructing Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, not as a warrior, but as a master of logistical and structural engineering. It's a really fascinating way to look at things, so let's get into it. And here it is, the core of our whole discussion, what we're calling the Wellington equation. Topographical defense plus logistical attrition equals sovereign victory. Now I know, that sounds a little academic, but this is the exact formula we're going to deconstruct over the next few minutes. You should think of it as this timeless recipe for overcoming what seem like impossible odds. See, it's not about brute force. It's about manufacturing a win by creating friction for your opponent and using the landscape itself as a weapon, a concept you could call topographical sabotage. So, here's the plan. First, we'll set the stage with the offensive commodity. Then we'll dig into the roots of his system in the Indian logistics engine. After that, we'll explore the geometry of defense and the ballistic proof that made it all work. We'll see it all come together in a masterclass at Waterloo, and then we'll wrap up by talking about your reverse slope and how you can apply these same ideas. All right, let's kick things off. To really get what made Wellington so special, you first have to understand the world he was operating in. And it was an era that was completely, and I mean completely, obsessed with the attack. You know, back in the Napoleonic era, the offensive wasn't just one strategy among many. It was everything. It was a glorious commodity. The whole industry of war, from how you trained your officers to how you made your weapons, was built around this one idea. Victory meant these grand, sweeping maneuvers, big frontal assaults, and dramatic heroic charges. It was almost like theater. Generals were celebrities, and they were expected to be aggressive, always looking for that one flashy, decisive battle that could win the war in a single afternoon. Anything less was just seen as weak or, frankly, incompetent. And into this world steps Arthur Wellesley. Now, he was not the star general everyone was betting on. To a lot of the British establishment, he was kind of seen as a C-list officer, an outsider who just didn't fit the mold. But that outsider perspective was his superpower. He saw what all the so-called experts were missing while they were busy planning their next grand maneuver. He figured out that the real power, the real engine of war, wasn't on the glorious battlefield at all. No, it was hidden away in the dusty, boring, completely unglamorous world of supply manifests, what we're calling unfiltered logistics. He saw a totally different path to power, one that just threw out the heroic script everyone else was reading from. Okay, so let's jump to our next section, the Indian logistics engine, because this is where Wellington's system really began. His early days in India were the perfect laboratory for him to develop that first part of his equation, logistical attrition. It was out there, thousands of miles from Europe, that he found what he called the hinge of victory, that one critical point that everything else would turn on. This slide just lays out the clash in thinking perfectly. On one side, you have the standard expert general of the day, totally focused on those grand maneuvers, on winning the big battle. And then you have Wellington. Well, everyone else in India in the 1790s was drawing up plans for heroic charges. Wellington was obsessing over spreadsheets for bullocks and grain. Seriously, they wanted a guy who could win the day. Wellington knew you had to build the engine first. That meant making sure his army could be fed and supplied with ruthless efficiency while systematically strangling his enemy's ability to do the same. He wasn't trying to win a single battle, he was building a system designed to make his enemy's defeat a slow, grinding, and absolute inevitability. And you know, his outsider status, what his peers might have called his awkward youth, was actually his greatest weapon. He had zero ego tied up in playing by the old rules. He didn't care about looking heroic. And that freedom let him see a truth that everybody else was missing. The highest form of power isn't about attacking first. It's about figuring out that the surest way to win is to just completely saturate the enemy's frustration. The goal isn't to break their battle lines, the goal is to break their will by making every single thing they try to do exhausting, difficult, and in the end, totally pointless. Okay, so he's got the logistical foundation totally locked down. With that in place, Wellington turned his attention to the second piece of the puzzle. He started auditing the very geometry of the battlefield. He'd figured out how to sustain his own army. Now we need to figure out how to use the ground itself to break the other guy. The ground is the strategy. For Wellington, this became everything. In an age that worshipped the attack, being called a defensive specialist was basically a career killer. It sounded passive, boring, maybe even cowardly. So he just reinvented what defense even meant. For him, defense wasn't going to be about sitting behind walls and waiting. It was going to be an active, aggressive weapon. It was a tool to outstarve, outweight, and most importantly, psychologically dismantle his opponents before they even laid eyes on his main army. And this is his masterpiece, the system he perfected, what we're calling the reverse slope oscillation. Let's just walk through this because it's so much more than just hiding behind a hill. This is a psychological trap. So step 1, confidence. The enemy advances up a slope. They can't see Wellington's main force, so they're feeling good, building momentum, thinking they have the advantage. Then step 2, blindness. They finally get to the top of the ridge, and for a split second, they're blind, they're disoriented, and their neat columns get messy. Which leads right to step 3, panic. All that confidence from a second ago, gone. It's replaced by sheer confusion. Where's the enemy? What is going on? And then, bam, step 4, activation. Just as that panic is peaking, they are hit with a perfectly synchronized, devastating volley of musket fire at point-blank range from a perfectly formed line of infantry they never even saw. It's not a tactic. It's a psychological kill switch. So the main thing to get here is that Wellington's defense was, first and foremost, a psychological weapon. He took the enemy's greatest strength, their aggression, their belief in the charge, and he turned it into their biggest weakness. The entire Napoleonic war machine, this giant hammer built for one purpose, was basically forced to swing wildly at a ghost it couldn't even see, completely exhausting itself with every single pointless charge up another empty-looking hill. So Wellington had the logistics, and he had the terrain system to mess with the enemy's head. But he needed one more piece of the puzzle. He needed the mechanical proof. He needed a specific formation that could deliver that final, crushing blow at just the right moment. A tool that would prove his system could beat a bigger army every single time. And this table just breaks down the raw logic perfectly. Let's just compare them. The standard French tactic was the attack column. It's deep, it's dense, and its main weapon is just raw momentum. But look at how many muskets are actually firing at once. It's a really low number. Only the guys in the first couple of ranks can even shoot. Now look at Wellington's answer, the 2-deep line. It's thin, it sacrifices depth for pure width, and its primary weapon, maximum firepower. Why? Because every single soldier in that line can fire his weapon at the exact same instant. Wellington wasn't trying to meet force with force. He was countering momentum with the sheer, undeniable shock of synchronized point-blank firepower. And this was a massive shift in mindset, not just for him, but for every soldier under his command. His men weren't told to attack in the old-fashioned heroic way. They were parts of a trap, waiting for the signal. They weren't supposed to charge impulsively. No, they were trained to be a mistake recognition weapon. This took incredible discipline. They had to wait, sometimes under cannon fire, for the enemy to make that one fatal mistake, cresting that ridge, disorganized and blind. And only then, at that precise moment, was the system activated. It was a victory of cold calculation over hot-headed impulse. And now we get to the final exam, the ultimate test of the Wellington equation. Let's look at how all these pieces we've been talking about, logistics, terrain, firepower, all came together, perfectly synchronized, into an absolute masterpiece at the Battle of Waterloo. You see, at Waterloo, Wellington wasn't just defending a hill. He was running a massive, high-stakes science experiment. This was it, the final exam for the system he had spent decades perfecting. And on the other side of the field was Napoleon, maybe the greatest military mind of his time, a guy whose entire career was built on speed and aggression. And Wellington's whole strategy was the exact opposite: patient, purposeful, calculation. He was patient on purpose, because he knew that if he could just hold his ground and trust his system, Napoleon's army would literally break itself against it. He chose the battlefield with obsessive care. The ridge at Mont Saint-Jean wasn't just some random hill. For Wellington, it was the ultimate weapon. It was the perfect natural stage to deploy his reverse slope system on a massive scale. By putting his army right there, he dictated the terms of the entire fight. He redesigned the geometry of the battle to his advantage before a single shot had even been fired. And you can see how he did it here. He used key parts of the landscape, these fortified farms like Hougoumont and La Haye, to create what were basically lanes. These strong points acted like anchors, forcing the huge French attacks to flow into specific, predictable channels. Napoleon thought he was choosing where to attack, but in reality, his army was being funneled directly into killing zones that Wellington had prepared for them. And this is the result. This is the genius of the whole system working together. The French army's greatest strength, its unstoppable momentum, was totally neutralized. They didn't crash against a wall and break. No, they were bled dry. It was like a powerful river being forced through a narrow, twisting pipe. It lost its pressure, it lost its force, until finally, it just collapsed from pure exhaustion. The master of the old game lost because he was playing against someone who had invented a whole new one. So, after all this military history, what's the big takeaway for us? Well, the Wellington equation isn't just about battles. It's a really powerful blueprint for solving complex problems in business, in your career, in your life. It's a whole different way of thinking about the challenges you face. What Wellington really left us with is the destruction of the myth that victory always goes to the loudest or most aggressive person in the room. His life proves that real, lasting victory is usually found in boring logistics and relentless calculation. Look at these points. Stop fighting the norm on its own terms. Instead, build your own defense. Audit your logistics. What are your real resources? Your time, your energy, your knowledge. Find your high ground. What's the unique position that only you can hold? Turn friction into a weapon. Use obstacles to wear down the problem. Don't let them wear you down. And most importantly, replace that gut impulse to just do something with patient, deliberate calculation. So I want to leave you with this one question. Think about a big challenge you're facing right now. Where is your Mont Saint Jean Ridge? What is that strategic high ground that you can occupy? Where is that place where, instead of launching another frontal assault, you could build a smart, patient system and just let the problem exhaust itself against your preparation? Because that's really the ultimate lesson here. Using brute force is always an option, but it's usually not the best one. A well-designed system, though, one built on solid logic and patient preparation, when it's applied correctly, isn't just an option, it's an inevitability. The truth is in the logic, and your patience is the code for your greatness. Thanks for watching.